This was a difficult script to write. I usually don't go into such details, but this time it's necessary. This game touches upon some serious subject matter. It does not shy away from the uncomfortable.
George, look at the screen.
It tries to explore with honesty
You are
issues
missing the
that could
cutscene.
resonate with people today more than 25 years ago. In writing
George. You have literally just talked over a plot important cutscene.
Look, by now it has become a tradition of Ultima games to have a striking opening that immediately grips your attention, and 7 is no exception. As soon as the game loads, you are escorted by an old friend, Iolo, to a scene of gruesome crime, with the purpose of having you solve it. That's quite a hook, eh? Remember how the murder mystery of Scarabrea was the best quest of Ultima VI? 7 starts with one, and it only goes up from here. The quest of the very same Scarabrea, for instance, is now... Oh yes, you are in for a ride with this game, man. The leads in your investigation eventually point to a religious organization called the Fellowship, which, according to a member, advances the philosophy of sanguine cognition, which is just a fancy name given to the 3 commandments of their faith. Strive for unity, trust thy brother, and worthiness precedes reward. At least that is how it is described by every single Fellowship member. In fact, just in this opening town of Trinzik, I had read that same dialogue multiple times from multiple people. My heart sank when I noticed that. But then I noticed something else. You see, the Fellowship description is the only dialogue that gets repeated, and only by its members, word for word. The moment you realize that, you might start to wonder what exactly goes on at that private meditation retreat they keep talking about and send their initiates to. So this repetition turns out to be here not because of laziness, but to make a plot significant point. In other words, the developers had worsened the dialogue on purpose to strengthen the overarching narrative. You realize that is something one might expect from an auteur work of fiction, right? Not from a commercial product aimed at the largest demographic. You play safe for the largest demographic. And 7, as you'll surely come to know very well, does not. I remember how Tim Rogers commented on the boldness of Dragon Quest VII, which dared to have about 4 hours of playtime before any combat would happen. Well, in 7 it was about 10 for me. Even after that, I would spend 2 to 3 hours on average between bouts of combat. People call Planescape a non-combat oriented RPG. But oh my god, even it would blush at the priorities of 7. It is the second least combat-oriented RPG I had ever played, with Disco Elysium, a game without combat, being the first. It's no coincidence I name-dropped those 2 games in particular. Ultima and Wizardry are the 2 weight-bearing, or how you say that, pillars of RPGs, and although starting from a similar place, they eventually develop almost contradictory philosophies. Wizardry is all about the dungeon crawling, the RPG system, the combat, the mechanics of play, with dialogue and world building only supplementing context for this gameplay. Games like Diablo or Dark Souls subscribe to this school of thought. Ultima is the opposite. It is the dialogue, story, and world building that are put in the spotlight here. The quests are not just excuses for gameplay, they are the main show. Each is an interactive story which often has multiple resolutions depending on the character you make. Fallout, Baldur's Gate, Mass Effect, etc. are the followers of that camp.
What about the Elder Scrolls, Gothic, Witcher and so on? There's a million games that don't fall into either category.
Of course, it's not like this dichotomy is one or the other situation every time. It's a gradient, if anything. Even games I had mentioned are not always just neatly fallen into one extreme. That extreme being Ultima VII. To illustrate the attitude of this game towards combat, one needs only to describe it. You might ask, how does the battle system of 7 work? What battle system? You see, Ultima historically had a problem with making an engaging combat system that would rival Wizardry's. After numerous failed attempts, their eventual solution to this issue was throwing hands in the air and proclaiming, "Screw it, let's have none." And so the combat of Ultima 7 was born. You just hit the initiate combat button and watch the game play itself. After 20 years of trying, we had finally returned to the combat system of Ultima 1. Wizardry 7 came out the same year. Just a reminder.
It's not that mindless. Magic system is pretty good here. Gives agency to the player.
Yeah, good point. Magic is, without a doubt, the saving grace of this gameplay. In fact, it's the only reason we can still call it gameplay. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. It was always a chore, at least for me, to micromanage the overly simplistic battles of previous games. So the fact that this one is as eager to get them over with as I am is a very welcome notion. One might reasonably ask, why not just remove combat entirely then? But that would actually be a step too far. What is the point of equipment if there are no enemies? The point of money if there is no equipment? The point of getting experience or leveling up? What about the feeling of danger as you explore the deep forest in search of a quest-important location? There are a ton of actually fun gameplay dynamics in Ultima that are directly tied to combat for it to be dropped entirely. You do not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and so the developers just changed the baby's diapers and made sure it didn't stink. As I was solving the murder case, which I never did if you're wondering, I had a very strange thing happen to me. As do the previous games, this one has a day and night cycle. So I had accidentally walked into a tavern at around the time the day shift ends. I had noticed NPCs walking into the tavern right behind me, sitting down, and this doesn't often happen to me, mind you, but I was compelled to just watch. The patrons started calling the barmaid and ordering food. The maid walked back into the kitchen and started making the food. I saw her take out the ingredients. I saw her put them into a cauldron. I saw her use the plates to get its content and bring it over to the people, yelling for her to hurry up. With curiosity, I had blocked her path and saw her alter it. The actions were not hardwired. It was AI. She was running to the kitchen and back, barely managing to keep up with the demands of her clients, and I thought, this place sure is understuffed. Poor girl. The moment I had this thought was the exact moment when I started to realize what I was getting myself into. If I had done this exact same thing in a different RPG, what would happen? Most probably nothing. The NPCs would just stand there in their designated places, repeating their idle animations, so that at a glance it would fake activity. If you're lucky, you'll get something like Oblivion's Radiant AI, with its uncanny NPCs producing a number of awkward interactions in a puppet theater-like fashion. When I stop to look at a tavern in that game, I do see activity, an ecosystem at play, yet the only thought I have is, that's an impressive technology you have here. And that when I'm not laughing at have you heard of the high elves or something like that. The point is, it feels fake, like the lack of ecosystem, but in a different way. Ultima VII though, when standing still in that little tavern, watching it during the rush hour, I had learned something about the world of the game. I had gleaned something from the life of that barmaid that she wouldn't tell me in her dialogue, which remains as neutral and polite as befits a conversation with a stranger. In a lesser game, she would start to go off about her being overworked, with that clumsy exposition serving to fill the necessary backstory quota. Or better yet, imagine her saying those exact same lines, but without AI that keeps her constantly serving the overflow of customers. Imagine her just standing there with one idle animation on loop. It would paint a very different picture now, wouldn't it? You see, the ecosystem here is not just for show. In juxtaposing the harsh working conditions I had observed with the friendly demeanor she had greeted me with, I had learned more about her than any exposition could possibly hope to explain. In my mind, she is a fully developed character now. This background NPC you spend 0.01% of your playtime on has depths. That impression had not changed even when I followed those patrons during their work hours. Surely a person that works a desk job would fall into the usual 8-hour sitting down routine. Well, it was anything but. The clerk would stand up, walk over to get something from a cabinet or a chest. He would pick an item and use it on another, putting stamps on documents and such. You can visit a blacksmith and see him perform the exact series of actions outlined in a book you can read on smithing. A sewer would actually be making threads out of wool that are then woven into cloth using a loom. The cook is actually making the food. One thing that genuinely shocked me was that the streetlights had to be manually lit up by someone in the evening. They are not just switched on or off automatically when an integer variable gets to a given value in the code. Like, why put such amount of work into stuff that 90% of players will not notice? Let me ask a different question. Why do Elder Scroll games put so much work into books that 90% of players will ignore? Well, because Ultima VII did that first. But that's besides the point. It's a lot easier to get lost in a world of a game when this world is actually there. Just look at the library here. Every book you see on screen is not a prop. It's an actual book you can click on and read. Though awesome by itself, the implications of this are awesomer still. You see, the main reason those books are there or in Elder Scrolls is not for you to read them. Even if the player doesn't read a single book in his entire playthrough, the very fact of them being there changes the way he perceives the world of the game. There's just a greater weight to an in-game library when you know for sure that it's actually there. It's not an illusion. It's like, this setting suddenly gets deeper. It's like this game suddenly feels real. And you can touch it. You can put out candles, play musical instruments, swing a cradle with a baby in it, paint a picture on a canvas, step by step, and even bake bread, which is a multi-step process accurately mimicking the real-life equivalent. There is a myriad of such minor little things you can do. And again, the majority of players will not. But it's the ability to interact with everything that is most important here. The world is not just a painted backdrop, it's there for you to touch if you so desire. And that touching is not just for fluff. As it turns out, Ultima Underworld was not the only Ultima of 1992 that could use an immersive sim tag in its description. In addition to stacking boxes to get to otherwise unreachable heights, how about picking up cattail traps, attracting attention of monsters, and then dropping those cattails in front of a door you lock behind your back? How about using a barrel of gunpowder to take out a dragon you'd otherwise not be able to kill? Or a telekinesis spell to sequence break major gameplay sections? So okay, let's get it straight. There is an ecosystem here with the most believable NPCs in RPG history, set in a world where you can not only interact with every single object, but that interactivity is meaningfully implemented into the core gameplay. How is that for a game world? And I haven't even talked about the lore yet. The events of the prior Ultima games are forming the backstory of 7 in a very special way. Those events were not personal dramas of individual characters, but world-defining, generational events, each hundreds of years apart. In a way, by playing Ultima series, we have been a part in the creation of a strong and interesting fantasy setting worthy of a novel. And just like in the best examples of fantasy novels, this lore is not on the nose, but seeps into the conversations in a very organic way. A character might mention the Shadow Lords, Blackthorn, or Father Antos. In an offhand way, you might mention the Second World War, Stalin, or Saint Augustine, for instance. The exposition is so organic that chunks of it are often left unelaborated upon. No gargoyle ever talks about their 8 virtues, only the 3 principles are mentioned. Not every town has its associated virtue spelled out by an NPC. You never hear about how New Majuular was built upon the ruins of a fallen city of pride. Those, among others, are massive parts of the lore, and they are left out just because they didn't organically come up in any given conversation. A different author would make sure to shove that information in somewhere, but those ones didn't. Because of how organic that rich history is woven into the conversations, there is a distinct sense of a fleshed out world that has a past and future outside of the immediate events of the game. But for those that are curious, the lore is elaborated upon in a substantial amount of literature you can pick up, which lays out the history, the beliefs of Britannia, both human and gargoyle moral systems, that are by now perfected with about 4 entries worth of iteration. Like, I can't stress enough just how excellently fleshed out the history, beliefs, philosophies, as in plural, language and cultural habits of Ultima VII are. They are easily on par with Morrowind and Planescape in terms of pure craftsmanship. But 7 does not stop there. It expands upon its mythos in a grand way. There is literature on ecology, animals, geography, parallel universes, magic, farming, shipmaking, smithing, baking. There's so much here, and everything you read about is not just fluff, but stuff that has or can happen in the game. The degree of it is insane. There is a book about how chickens will cover their eggs with straw to sustain worms so that they won't have to sit on their sensitive areas for too long. You'd think it's just fluff, right? No, it's actually a gameplay hint to search the coop for eggs hidden in straw. Do you realize how rare it is to walk into a museum in a video game and look at several rooms full of ancient artifacts and have intimate familiarity with each one? Sounds like enough lore for you? Well, in a similar fashion to 5, 7 builds an additional layer of world building on top of the already well-established setting of Britannia. The Fellowship is not just a plot device, it's an integral part of the society, influencing its discourse, culture, and social behaviors. We find the Britannian society in the midst of a transition between two distinct cultural paradigms, the effect of which on the people cannot be overstated. Depending on the person, there is tension, fear, fascination, hope, etc., with every person dealing with the changing world in their own unique way. Bonds are broken, commitments are abandoned. The effect of those changes on the economical life of Britannia alone is massive. There is artificial cornering of markets by conspiring Fellowship members. There is a Britannian mining company which has a very problematic company policy. Essentially, they use unskilled labor for very low pay, but in order to meet the necessary production quota, they incline them to use the provided performance-enhancing drugs so that they would not get fired. This pursuit of minimal cost, maximum gain leads to the horrifying pollution of the Loch Lake. You don't have to hear the complaints of Cove's villagers to learn of the pain that this devastation of a landmark has caused, because you feel it yourself. For 3 games straight, that lake was as big a friend as Chaminade or Dupre, and now that friend is choking before your very eyes. It's not just places or artifacts that have history, but people too. You meet old friends that refer to events long gone, like Sentry or Katrina. I remember Katrina back in 4, hiding in that corner of ruins of Majuular among the ghosts of lost pride. I remember training her so that she could stand her ground on par with Chaminade and Jana and the rest of the gang. But now she seems to stand on her own just fine. How about Chuckles the Jester, whom we have known for 7 games now? Some might know him too well, even.
Like Lord British's name is on this, but this was Chuckles' joint.
This is a Chuckles work.
This is Chuckles, like his,
Go subscribe to those sectors, they're really good.
Debut or whatever.
You can make an interesting setting just out of Fellowship layer alone, but using it to deepen the one of Britannia elevates the latter to even greater heights. The creation of such a complex setting takes a toll, so one could forgive the developers for forgetting about the little details. Except they didn't. How about walking into the hut of your ever-supportive friend Iolo, who has not even remotely hinted at anything bothering him, who has been a pillar of strength for you to rely upon, only to discover the house in disarray, trash littered everywhere. Is that really your place, Iolo? How can you live here? You stumble upon a letter. Gweno, his wife, has left on a dangerous expedition, while Iolo remained, holding vigil for the return of the Avatar, to which he has dedicated his life. The disarray of the house is just a reflection of the turmoil in the soul of your loyal companion, who has never once let his inner demons distract the Avatar from his quest. One does not expect an epic RPG about world-shattering events with lore enough to fill several books to have this level of subtlety. But when one encounters it, it's like discovering that underneath that shining armor, the knight had a beating heart all along. You see, this game is littered with details like this. How the mayor of Trinsic has a secret office so that he wouldn't get distracted from his work. How Lord British's bed is king size, yet the only company he has is a suggestive painting on the wall. Combine that with a provocative book in the near vicinity and you no longer need any words to understand the reason he, despite claiming the opposite, was not opposed to opening a nursery in his own castle. He is lonely, yet in a mature, adult way. He has duties, responsibilities, the weight of a mountain on his shoulders, and he bears it with the strength one should expect of a king. But you, his close friend, you can tell there was more in that friendly remark he made to Shamino than meets the eye. You just have to pay attention to details. Imagine how much lesser this game would be if, during a dialogue with him, a quest to find a bride would pop into your diary after a cartoony exchange in which he admits to want one. It might have fit the juvenile tone of 6, but here, the king and the Avatar treat each other with dignity and respect. Lord British's private life is his, and not for us to intrude upon. Who could have imagined such subtlety of the writing to be displayed in this game? Such restraint of the authors who had not allowed themselves to draw attention to those details, but instead just believed their audience's ability to notice them. It will not be an exaggeration when I say that 7 has one of the greatest worlds ever made in an RPG. There are a lot of great settings with great lore. There is a handful with functioning ecosystems that make the world feel alive, but there is even less of those that combine the two into a symbiotic relationship of such quality. 7 is a game that perfectly immerses you into a brilliantly constructed setting worthy of being immersed into. And it's not even the core appeal of this game. It's there to provide a convincing environment for quests and dialogues. How could they possibly live up to that setting? Let's talk about Vesper. Vesper is a desert mining town in which humans and gargoyles have to live side by side. Gargoyles are a humanoid race that had to migrate to Britannia after the events of the previous game. 6 had already tackled the theme of racism, but not like this. Sure, of course there's a rotten sleazebag, brimming with irrational hatred towards people of different color that you probably have expected from a game like this. But how about a loving, kind mother that is perfectly normal in every single way, except in the way she talks about gargoyles, or rather avoids talking about them? How about a strong, empowered female that is working toe-to-toe with her male co-workers, one that has an extremely pleasant and easygoing demeanor, but hands you a leaflet with the words "Keep Britannia clean, send gargoyles back" printed on it in capital letters? How about the disturbing notion that every single racist character in that town is not a cartoonish caricature, but someone you might know in real life? The gargoyles are not saint-like. It does irritate them to be the subjects of such prejudice, leading to various degrees of venting and in varying forms. They do have great people among them, most of them even, but have their rotten apples too. No person is 100% good or 100% evil. Those extremes can only be found in movies, books, or games, or rather those of inferior quality to Ultima VII. In one of those, you'd fix the town by either making the humans see the errors of their ways or punishing them for not. In real life, there is no such easy fix for the irrational yet deeply rooted hatred in the tribalistic human beings. You can't just cut out the cancer that has already eaten away half your heart. Neither can you stop that heart from beating, lest you be the very monster you despise. So what can you do? A better question is, what shouldn't you? The kid of the racist mother sneaks away daily to talk with a gargoyle named Forlem, whom she considers a friend and who teaches her about his culture and prejudice of humans. In time, a better future could be built. Her mother, however, gives you a quest. Discover what the girl is up to and report back. She hopes that it has nothing to do with those horrible gargoyles. If you follow those RPG completionist instincts, you might tell her what you saw, as there is no alternative solution to that quest. The mother thanks you for your help. A day later you find that her husband has killed Forlem. When asking the child about her friend, she cries and calls you a monster. Perhaps she's right. If you thought the alcoholism quest in Disco was subversive, what will you say about this one? A quest you should, by all accounts, leave incomplete, unless you want to harm the Gargoyle Society even more than it was harmed already. But still, how can you help? You can bring a stolen locket to a gargoyle that has all but gave up hope to ever see it again. That may not be much, but even for an avatar, that is all you can do. There is no fix for Vesper in this game. You are not the white savior here. The story is not told to make you feel good. The story is told to make you feel bad and grow.
You are saying that, but has it occurred to you that maybe the reason there is no resolution to Vesper is because the developers just couldn't implement one in time before the deadline?
I don't know, this subject is way too well handled to be rushed. Yeah, thinking about it, this game definitely unfinished. Garrett had once said that Ultima VII was the most masterfully executed of the Ultima series. Going by this statement and the general reputation of 7, I had expected it to be just an overall improvement of 6. The last thing I expected was to have so many control UI and just straight up bug issues that 6 looks like a modern game in comparison. I kid you not, in terms of quality of life issues, 7 is the least polished Ultima game I had played since Ultima 2. It has gotten so bad that I honestly can't tell if it's better or worse than 5. I mean, at least you could see the health of your party members without having to press Z 8 times. And no, I'm not exaggerating actually. You literally have to press Z 8 times to see the health of each party member. There are so many issues here that it would take about an hour just to address them all. So instead, here's the list. If you're interested, you can pause the video and read through them. But I'll just say 2 things. First, I'm usually the guy that prefers the original versions of games, but even I have to say that you should probably play 7 with an Exalt mod that is universally acknowledged as the preferred way to play this game. Second, the big difference between issues in 7 and 5 is that the ones in the latter would just take you out of the game. But many issues in 7 turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The inventory management, for instance, accurately mimics the clutter of a stuffed backpack management, and thus surprisingly helps immersion, which is my controversial opinion for the day. The same with the manual food consumption. In 6 it was automatic, but now a meal is an entire event. A quality of life downgrade? Sure, but is it one that benefits the experience overall? Absolutely. But not everything is that excusable. Entire chunks of this game are missing. There is a whole tutorial on the weapon crafting with mines already set up from which you can get various ores for different swords to be forged from, not to mention the complete assortment of blacksmith instruments. Yet the crafting is just not implemented. This whole gameplay mechanic, like so many others, is just sitting there like a negative space reminding you of this game's rushed release. And yes, it does affect the quests, but in a very bizarre way. It's very difficult to explain, but a quest is a vehicle for driving the adventure, motivating the players with rewards as well as giving excuse to engage with the gameplay, battle mechanics specifically. But here it's more like a young girl with a child is struggling with poverty, hoping for her husband to earn enough to sustain a living. The husband failed to earn. In hopes of bringing at least something for his wife and child, he climbs the fence of a private garden and steals some apples, only to find himself locked away in a cell on a charge of theft. The girl heard. She feels for her beloved, but what should she do now? She already lives in the homeless shelter, built by the fellowship, with them telling her that either she pays, joins with their cult, or gets thrown out. She knows that the fellowship is wrong, even though she can't explain why. But what choice does she have other than to join? Her husband is locked up in a different town. Hearing her plea, the avatar goes to that town and talks with the man behind bars. He then attempts to reason with the accuser, but yields no results. The avatar has connections in high places. Lord British immediately sides with the prisoner, abashed at the injustice of a sentence given for such a minor offense. He not only releases the prisoner, but gives him a job. The avatar brings the news to the girl, which suddenly beams with happiness long forgotten. It's as if she saw hope in his life. You don't receive any reward for doing this. You don't see the husband ever again, so you can't hear his words of gratitude. It is never again brought up with the Lord British. None of the people that pressured the girl, driven the husband to crime, or unjustly locked him up get any reprimanding. The girl still lives in the fellowship shelter. You don't even get a classic check mark next to her quest in a journal. There is no journal in Ultima VII. Nothing, as far as the player can see, has changed in any noticeable way. But it sort of did. In a deep way, it did. This almost painfully real incompleteness of stories is what defines the Ultima quests. It is the ghost story of 6, in which you couldn't help a ghost to discover peace, no matter how hard you tried. It is the lighthouse of 5, in which you had to simply leave a dysfunctional family to their misery, which is the soul of Ultima. It's like those stories build up to a satisfying resolution befitting a fun RPG, but then go nowhere, remaining unsolvable and forever incomplete. In a lesser game, that apple-stealing quest would culminate in a tactical battle against the gardener and his squad of goons, with fireballs and sneak attacks and healing potions. It would end with the garden being gifted to the couple, and them rewarding you with a family ring that has a +4 to intellect and +6 to fire magic. One that you'd sell in a couple hours, when a better one would fall out of a troll. There is an escapist joy in becoming such a hyperbolic vehicle of justice in any given game, but why did tears swell in my eyes as I unsuccessfully tried to ward again and again that the appearance of quiet hope in that girl is a more beautiful sight than that? Why does it feel like an even harder to believe resolution than that comically exaggerated alternative? But regardless of whether it was intentional or not, 7 is, without a doubt, the highest point of the series because it embraced that incompleteness, that maturity in its writing. You don't solve the racial tensions of Vesper. You just help one gargoyle get back a stolen locket that meant a lot to him. You don't clean up the polluted lock lake of garbage. You just help to sign a bill that prohibits garbage from being thrown into it. A bill that won't even help, since it is the Britannian mining company we are talking about. Its refuse is what substitutes the bulk of pollution, and bills do not affect rich people. Even when you get something that seemingly feels like the most blatantly escapist of quests, there is nuance that another game would totally disregard. A woman asks you to save her baby that was snatched away by Harpies. You do just that. I can turn around and go to her immediately, as my party member suggested, but something inclined me to keep going. I've found the nest, near it the gory remains of a man with his head crushed, and in it the corpse of a toddler. You may have saved this one baby, but someone tried to save another and failed. Was it the father of the child? Did the child see his father coming, hope surging in that little heart, believing fully in impossibility of that being the end, and seeing his protector being killed before dying himself? There was no reason to go in that direction. No item or dialogue, nothing. There was no reward for saving the child too. Did you need one? One example that genuinely stunned me was Silamo on the Isle of Turfin. Gargoyles segregate their society into two classes, wingless and winged gargoyles, the former being treated akin to slaves, especially since in 7 it is confirmed that they can talk and reason and do everything the winged ones claim they cannot. Silamo is a wingless gargoyle that lives separately from the rest, filled with resentment and anger. The systemic oppression getting so bad to him that he won't even bring up his mistreatment unless you bring up this topic yourself. Now, I need you to humor me for a moment and try to get into my headspace as I was playing this game. There is probably about 200 NPCs in that game, each having a story, personality, personal problems, etc. Some of them are terrible people. Some of them show it very clearly with their behavior and demeanor complementing their actions. Silamo acts and looks just like one of those people. He is rude, hostile, uncooperative. The game signals with each line that you are talking to one of the bad characters. Now, do you recall how the houses of Lord British and Iolo were giving us insights into their lives? 7 does this a lot. The houses here are most often windows into the inner worlds of their inhabitants, telling what they don't want to say. Just imagine then what the house of such a rude bastard will look like. Not quite what you'd expect. One more thing I need you to know is that this game uses music very deliberately. Each track playing at a major location or several. So the graveyard music doubles as the Sultan's Palace theme, and the Pandora's theme, and the Scarabria theme, you get the idea. The developers wanted to get the most out of the limited music they had, but this music is only used twice in the entire game. At a secluded house of the wisest and most virtuous man of this whole game, and here. You see, I don't need to talk to Silamo to say that I know him anymore. In fact, talking with him gave me the wrong impression. An impression that might have led me to believe that the gargoyle class segregation was somewhat justified. The most beautiful soul on this whole island belongs to a guy that looks least like it. The shocking thing is, Silamo is not even an important figure. He isn't tied to any quest and doesn't have a word count comparable to any of the hundreds of other NPCs in this game. From a practical development standpoint, it doesn't make sense to give his house a unique theme. It doesn't make sense to dedicate such disproportional amount of resources and attention to such a minor part of the game. It doesn't make sense unless you view it as a work of art. A lot of this game will fail to make any sense if you view it as a product for pure entertainment. Why sour the triumph of a player with a literal baby corpse? Why not shower him with rewards for his completed quests? Why not let his actions change the world of the game? Why not clean the Lock Lake, for Christ's sake? That's like asking why tragedy exists as a genre. That's like asking why art exists as a whole. That's like asking, why do you tell me the hurtful truth instead of comforting lie? The only actual question I have on my mind is, how could such an auteur game become so commercially successful? Look at this arsenal of magic weapons in Serpent's Hold, the home of noble knights loyal to your friend Lord British. Isn't it obvious that a key for that door will be rewarded for a long and difficult quest line? I mean, you can see it, right? It's obvious. A classic tantalize with future reward trope that is as deeply ingrained in gamers as WSD controls at this point. There is no quest. It's not for you. You can be a dick and steal it if you like, but you won't be given those items in exchange for good boy points. In a standard RPG, being good gets you rewarded. The classic moral system is you either steal the item or wait for the NPC to give it to you. Either way, you get the item. The result is the same. In Ultima, being good means you don't get the item that doesn't belong to you. As simple as that. We've covered only a few of the stories within this game, and there are many more. I won't go into details for every one, but each town is essentially its own story that deals with a different topic. Jellum deals with bullying, Britannia with corruption. Buccaneers Bay explores the issue of gambling and brothel legalization. Pause deals with poverty and how it can be used to force people into following ideologies they may otherwise prefer not to. The Serpent's Hold shows how people in power are more concerned about appearances than doing actual good by the people. So the very story of this place is that you have to figure out who has defaced that statue, essentially, and that's the big thing that everyone is concerned about and everyone is trying to figure out. But there is also this woman that is literally tells you first sentence almost that, oh, my baby is stolen by Harpies, they took it to this location, can you help me? No one, this is a place of knights, this is where the knights are. No one out of them has helped her. Instead, they are walking about trying to figure out who on earth has put some dirt on Lord British's statue. That's insane. Cove highlights how, even faced with major environmental catastrophe, people that care are incapable of standing in the face of companies, but most people don't care either way. It ain't called Town of Love for nothing. Minak has one of my favorite stories, highlighting the moral grayness of what might seem like a purely black and white issue. A powerful organization, you guessed it, the Fellowship, propels the career of an incompetent shipwright for the sake of marketing. That incompetency is proven by you, leading to his license being revoked. Case closed? More like a coffin. The shipwright in question, Owen, turns out to be genuine. He is deeply passionate about building ships. He was passionate about it long before he got any fame out of it. He doesn't see how he can lead a life in which he is forbidden from making ships. So he doesn't. I did not expect this to happen. The pain of being severed from his passion was so great that he did not hesitate for a moment of committing the most difficult decision a person can make.
I don't know about this one, George. Seems to me that ego was the prime motivator, not the shipbuilding.
Even if he cared more about fame than ships, which I doubt, isn't that a bit too big a consequence for what is essentially a town image issue? The Fellowship wanted to build a statue of the guy, the rest of artisans did not. Now he is dead. If you feel like I'm making too big a deal out of it, then you probably haven't played this game or experienced its writing. Asking me to not make a big deal out of it is the same as asking me to not make a big deal out of that scene in Disco Elysium where you tell a wife that her husband is not coming back home. Because who cares, he was an alcoholic anyway. The whole point of such stories is to make you care, you know? Their quality is directly derived from how well they manage to do it. The quality of the reader, though, is in how well they can feel. Ultima VII made me care. And it's not because of exaggerated pathos or explosive drama, but because of the lack of it. There is such a subdued strength to this writing, such a tasteful restraint when dealing with difficult subject matter. It not only doesn't shy away from the ugliness of humanity, but also doesn't fall into the trap of detaching normal humans from that ugliness. It doesn't glorify suicide or make it into a story of a tortured soul. The suddenness of it coming from a person you least expected, the indifference of the people you considered to be moral, the hollow feeling you get as you can't help but feel partially responsible even though having done nothing wrong. There's no period at the end of this quest, no resolution, only this. It's not like this game doesn't have its moments of levity. No game of such length should be one note, and thankfully 7 is not completely miserable. But I am, which is why I tend to gravitate towards such matters. But still, what should you do about this misery? How can you live in a world where this can happen? Well, that's where the Fellowship comes in with their easy answer. Follow the sanguine cognition and you shall find happiness. Absolution. Of course, the person behind the Fellowship turns out to be the Guardian, the main villain of the game, who wants to use the cult as means of achieving power and influence. Hey, like the real-life cult leaders do. So you know how cults recruit people by catching them at an especially vulnerable moment in their lives and preying on their insecurities, offering answers and guidance and companionship at the times they are most desperate. The Fellowship is one such cult. I especially like the details that even though the Guardian does have a meditation retreat, what he doesn't is have his members isolated in a forest wearing robes and drinking Kool-Aid. He doesn't require them taking their life's possession and giving it all to the cult. Sure, some cults do that, but not the ones that eventually become recognized as churches. Guardian is not here to make a quick buck the easy way. He is intending to conquer Britannia, not by force, by the sheer scope of his church's influence.
He does intend to use force, though. His plan is to have the Fellowship build the Black Gate, so that he could enter Britannia. Once there, he will be unstoppable.
Yes, thank you for laying out the literal plot, Seal. I often forget to myself. It's just, in real life, no evil Lord Xeno will descend from heaven and conquer Earth if the Scientologists don't pray hard enough. You shouldn't take fiction literally, is what I'm trying to say, but metaphorically. What the Black Gate story actually tries to tell us is that once a person's enterprise, whatever that enterprise may be, a cult in this case, reaches a large enough traction, there's pretty much no way of stopping him from acquiring real power.
Fair enough. Somewhat basic, though. Let's call it layer 1. Can you dig a bit deeper?
Oh, is that a challenge? Sure, let's dig. The slightly less obvious reading of the Fellowship is communism. The trust, unity, and worthiness ideals, the pursuit of which erases individuality while paradoxically empowering the worst aspects of each individual, the use of brainwashing and propaganda of noble ideals such as equality and working together for common goals sort of thing. All of those bring up associations that, due to my personal background, ring certain bells. I mean, Fellowship is just another way of saying camaraderie. The Guardian is red, for Christ's sakes.
So this game is a critique of communism.
Well, there is a critique of communism in this game, but I'm not sure if the game as a whole... Okay, you know what? Let's just talk about Alagner. Alagner is a secluded scholar, living a simple life of pursuing truth. Acquiring his notes about the Fellowship is a major step towards completing the game. Within the text, Alagner attempts to debunk its philosophy, showing how the very ideological core of the Fellowship is rotten. Now, I might get controversial here, but I find his critique to be lacking. He points out the hypocrisy with how the teachings of Fellowship are enacted by its members. Trust, unity, and worthiness are only really applicable to the members, while anyone outside the cult can be lied to, mistreated, and shunned. That's a valid criticism, but it's not an issue of the philosophy itself. I challenge you, the viewer, to come up with a singular ideology or religion that hasn't been hypocritically used to enact the very thing it claims to fight against. Christianity teaches to love thy neighbor? How about burning them at the stake in the name of Inquisition? Communism proposes the equality of all people? Well, Stalin, Beria, and the other leaders sure seem to be enjoying the luxury of a privileged position. Capitalism means free market, more like freedom of a goldfish to be eaten in the sea of sharks. The point is that pretty much most ideologies, beliefs, and moral systems sound good on paper, but get twisted into monstrosities the very moment they are put into practice. Alagner's problem is that he mistakes the philosophy with its application. Let me repeat, any philosophy can be twisted in such a way. Need I remind you that the quote-unquote good philosophy of the 8 virtues set by the Lord British has already shown this very problem, when Blackthorn built a horrific dystopia out of this ideology in Ultima V. Alagner, however, in his biased predisposition towards the 8 virtue system, turns a blind eye towards the fact that, according to his very own logic of horrible practice disproving a noble ideology, the 8 virtue system is just as bad as the Fellowship one is.
Where does it say, anywhere in this game, that he is an avid 8 virtue system follower? I feel like you are projecting stuff.
You might be right, actually. I guess I'd fallen into the trap of prejudice myself without even realizing it. But regardless of his feelings towards the virtue system, he is wrong about the Fellowship. Let me set it straight. There's absolutely nothing horrible about the fellowship philosophy. In fact, we live by it every day without even thinking. We do prioritize union. For example, when a new class is formed at a college or university, people tend to form groups and friendships. Human beings gravitate towards each other. And need I remind you, we do tend to earn reward, aka worthiness precedes reward. That's why we build skills, get education, work out, etc. How about trust? Sure, when a sworn enemy offers you a suspicious drink, you have all the reason in the world to not trust him. But let's say you meet a person at a bar, and they say mid-conversation that they work as a doctor. Why wouldn't you trust them? Trust is our default state as human beings. We need reasons not to trust someone. So, if anything, I would criticize the fellowship philosophy for being too basic, rather than being wrong or anything. It's pointless, in other words. It doesn't supersede anything onto the basic human condition like any ideology should. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with this belief system. Just as there's nothing wrong with the 8 virtues or Christianity or communism or whatever. The problem is with bad actors that, like devious lawyers of a major company, find loopholes within the doctrines and use them to enact, well, evil. In fact, the Alagner mentality, when taken to its logical extreme, would mean the active rejection of any moral system. Now, I'm not qualified to say as to whether it's a good call or not, but it is plausible that there is a reason as to why we, people, tend to need one. Alagner's approach is akin to saying, I refuse to eat any food because it will be spoiled if left for too long or dropped in dirt. You just have to make sure not to drop it then. The fellowship is obviously evil, but simply because the leaders of that movement are in it for selfish, evil reasons. They want to exploit the weak and gain control over them rather than help. If a more benevolent person were to take the role of Batlin, who is a spokesman for Guardian, so to speak, or the Guardian himself, the same sanguine cognition would just be a net positive thing. Like, seriously, it's easy in hindsight to side with the people that said, I don't like fellowship because there's something off about them. But isn't that prejudice talking? What reason did those people have for suspecting the fellowship? Let me point out that the only person you convert out of their cult in the entire game by reminding him of good times he had with a friend he left for the cult is a self-admitted monster that reminisces about committing the crimes so awful I can't even say them in a YouTube video. What possible weight does those fellowship buggers ain't right has coming from a person like that? Or look at the Serpent's hold, those noble knights that aren't in the fellowship. Sit around trying to figure out who defiled the statue of their monarch instead of helping a woman whose baby was stolen by Harpies. She literally says the exact location they took the baby to, and those noble knights do nothing to help. Are they really the ones to make the moral call, like, yeah, I don't know what it is, but there's something off about the fellowship? Maybe it isn't the philosophy that is in the wrong here, like Alagner would have liked to believe. Especially since we now know that it actually doesn't even alter anything about the way humans act. The fellowship had nothing to do with the racism in the town of Vesper. It was already there. You know, maybe the reason people act like monsters is not always because of a philosophy or an ideology that drives them. It's comforting to have a boogeyman, an ideology or belief to point to and say, this is what turns people evil. Sometimes it's true, admittedly, but rarely. I'm sorry to break it to you, but most often people don't have to be brainwashed to be evil. Often all they need is an excuse. That's the difference between Blackthorn and Batlin. Blackthorn actually believed he was doing the right thing. He was a victim of an ideology that birthed him. Batlin is just out there to make a name for himself. 7 doesn't say that one ideology is better than another. In fact, it doesn't even say that the balance between them is the best course to take. There is no one-fix-all solution to the question of how to motivate and move through life. This game may have a critique of communism, but it's not a dismissal of it. For some characters in the game, Fellowship just straight up improved their lives, objectively. For others, it brought misery and turmoil, just like how the 8 virtues system did for some and not the others. In a Hermann Hesse book, Siddhartha, the titular character says the following: one can find wisdom, one can live it, one can be born by it, one can work wonders with it, but one can neither speak nor teach it. On the very opposite side of the same island as Alagner lives another person, the florist Sam. When asked about him, an innkeeper exclaims a good-natured laugh and says, "Thou wouldst have to meet Sam for thyself. He is an incredible person who is perfecting the art of enjoying life." Curious, I went to see this person at his home. It is the only house in the game with a glass roof. When entering Silamo's abode, you heard music used only in one other place, Alagner's. When talking to Sam, you hear this one. He talks about life, how his father was more interested in his counting gold than devoting himself to studies. How, after a time traveling the world, he would settle on this island of Majuular, finding it unlike any in all of Britannia. His business doesn't offer much, just enough to sustain his living. However, when asked about life, you don't hear a word of complaint. Just the opposite. He lacks the eloquence of Alagner or Lord British or Batlin, yet in his simple wisdom he had reached a state beyond any of his contemporaries. Instead of following the guidance of 8 virtues, the Fellowship, or his very own father, he has searched for himself and found a passion for flowers. You can't just take his example as a role model and then copy and paste it onto others. Not everyone would be as content being a poor bachelor florist living in the countryside. A girl in a town of Cove named Nastasia that takes care of the forgotten altar of compassion has as similar a life situation as you can get to Sam, yet her life is that of sadness and regret. You see, it is his wisdom, not Alagner's or Nastasia's or mine or yours or anyone's. It is a wisdom reached through effort, perseverance, and luck. Wisdom that cannot be taught. When listening to his inarticulate speech, it is very hard to be converted. But you shouldn't be anyway. What you should take note of is the happiness with which he proves something far deeper than any ideology could express. no matter how persuasive its sermons are. You can't just rely on one ideology or another to provide answers for the mystery of your life. You can't even rely on the careful balance between them, because that in itself is a rigid path. Just like how there is no correct answer of what profession you have to choose, there is no true answer as to what person you have to become, what soul you have to forge and mold out of your questions and experiences. We as human beings exist in constant motion. That motion is life. The absence of it is death. So why would you assume that this universal rule does not apply to the realm of your mind, soul, consciousness, whatever you call it? Why would you willingly put yourself into a coffin of a rigid ideology, even if it's carefully crafted over a millennia of iteration? When Siddhartha found his personal enlightenment, it came in form of a river.
You've just said that there is no perfect role model, but now you pose this Siddhartha character as an example to follow, like a voice of absolute reason.
Damn, that's a good point, Seal. It just came to mind. Of course Siddhartha is not a role model. But you know, despite being the wisest person in this game, Sam is not a role model either. It was with great pain that I added luck to the description of his wisdom, because there are other people that followed the very same path of Sam's self-discovery, ones we are already familiar with: Owen and Silamo. Owen had also followed his passion. It just happened to be a more demanding one than taking care of flowers. A poorly made ship will lead to people dying. If you are just not capable of getting good enough to engineer a quality ship, you should not be allowed to work in that field. Silamo, on the other hand, is passionate about flowers, just like Sam, and would like nothing more than live like Sam. But he is a slave, under the winged gargoyles that consider him not intelligent enough to make his own life's choices. The only difference between Silamo and Sam are the circumstances of their birth. One was lucky to not be born into a world of oppression. The other was not. Within the dilapidated ruins of Skarabraia, a town once known for the virtue of spirituality, there is a ghost of a tortured one. If you ask him to answer a question of life and death, he says, there are no answers, only questions. There is no philosophy, ideology, or belief, or even a path that is bulletproof. You may actively and with rigor pursue the moral truth of the most noble ideology, only to find out that you are as evil as a person that actively manipulates masses to benefit from them. You may take the exact steps as Sam, feel that you got the answers after a long journey of self-discovery, only to end up in a place of misery and pain. There are no answers, only questions. That is all.
Are you going to add anything?
No, what would I add?
Something? The way you left it, there is no right way to act. Follow an ideology and you are wrong. Criticize an ideology and you are wrong. Do nothing and you are wrong. What should you do to not be wrong?
I don't know.
Wonderful.
Dude, what can I say? How many times since Ultima 4 has the Avatar reached enlightenment? It's almost comedic at this point. And he's still looking for answers. This game is Socratic in its message, if anything. It doesn't claim to have an answer to the meaning of life, but instead it's a journey across human condition, if anything. Not a guidebook on how to live.
Forget about the game, George. Just you. Do you know what to do? What to believe?
Sil, you know perfectly well I don't. Like, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would be the first person to raise my hand. But now, I don't know. I'm sorry.
And I thought my opinion of you couldn't get any lower. Guess I should be happy that this video will not be watched by too many people. Wouldn't want you to spread uncertainty among the populace.
Guess there is some justice in this world, after all.